From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The media and the Justice Department spar in court Thursday over the release of a secret FBI affidavit that justifies the search of Donald Trump's home in Mar-a-Lago. Plus, a week later, has the FBI search over classified document retention by Mr. Trump helped him politically? Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot here with my colleagues Kim Strassel and Kyle Peterson. We're all with the Wall Street Journal editorial page. So this legal fight over the affidavit, which is filed with the court with federal magistrate Judge Bruce Reinhart, but has not been made public in contrast to the warrant, which was made public last week on Friday after Attorney General Merrick Garland said he wanted it to be made public, and Donald Trump agreed to it. Difference this time, though, the Justice Department is opposing the release of the affidavit on grounds that releasing it could compromise the criminal investigation that they have underway into Donald Trump's handling of the documents. The press corps, of course, wants it released. The affidavit has filed motions in court to do so. That includes, in its own motion, our parent company, that is the Wall Street Journal's parent company, Dow Jones and Co. And the idea is that justification in the motion for releasing it would be that there's an intense public interest in this case and that it is very significant to get to the public to understand what the Justice Department is up to here. Donald Trump also saying he wants it released. And let's listen to former Vice President Mike Pence on this issue of transparency over the Justice Department.
Calls to defund the FBI are just as wrong as calls to defund the police. The truth of the matter is, we need to get to the bottom of what happened. We need to let the facts play out. But more than anything else, the American people need to be reassured in the integrity of our justice system and the very appearance of a recurrence of politics playing a role in decisions at the Justice Department demands transparency as never before. And I will continue to call on the Attorney General and the Justice Department to make that information available to the American people and do so now.
What do you make of it?
Yeah, in addition to those motions that were filed saying that there is a clear and powerful interest in getting this out, which, by the way, is an acknowledgement that this is a standalone case. It isn't just your routine Department of Justice investigation. It is an investigation into a former president. A lot of the motions have also pointed out that much of this, or at least the broad contours of it, have already been leaked and reported, and that should weigh against the Department of Justice in its arguments for ongoing secrecy. Some people have also pointed out that given the Justice Department decided to unseal the warrant, that's only half a picture, or in fact a slice of a picture, that they have an obligation to go ahead and also put out the affidavit. I think working against those arguing that is simply that this is a Department of Justice, and they have made a claim to the U.S. Magistrate Judge in this, Bruce Reinhart, that this affidavit would include evidence from witnesses that could cause them to stop cooperating, that there would be other evidence that would be exposed that could derail their overall investigation, etc. And at least in history, judges have tended to be very deferential to the Justice Department in cases like this. Now, again, it's a very different situation, but I am skeptical that maybe the judge will agree to this. I'm also on the belief that even if he did, there would probably be so many redactions in this, it's not clear how much information we'd really get.
Fair point, Kim. I think that might be likely. And, if Justice Department, though, I think, as you suggest, would have a stronger case if this were, some mob boss. This is a former president, had 70 million people vote for him, and he may run for president against the sitting president, Joe Biden. So there's just a much heavier burden, I think, on justice to justify this release and the need for transparency. And I just want to quote from the Dow Jones motion with Judge Reinhart here. One of the questions, of course, is the degree of and likelihood of injury from the release of an affidavit like this. And Dow Jones' motion makes the point that continued concealment is more likely to be injurious than disclosure, as the nature of political discourse, which abhors a vacuum, has pumped all kinds of sensational suppositions into the informational void. End quote. Not the most mellifluous prose there. On the other hand, it makes the point that without knowing what the facts are, Again, we're seeing leaks, all kinds of speculation about what Donald Trump did or didn't do, claims that, he took these because the documents there and back to Mar-a-Lago because he wanted to sell secrets. No evidence for that. You had the leak to the Washington Post saying that the documents related to nuclear secrets. There was nothing in the warrant to suggest that. And all of this reminds me, Kyle, of the leaks that we saw during the Russian collusion probe, where story after story leaked that were treated as if they were sensational, really suggesting real problems for President Trump in relation to Russia. And it all turned out to be nothing.
It does seem to undermine one of the arguments the Justice Department is making against unsealing this affidavit. So I'll just read a line from their argument to the judge, their written argument. It says, the release of this type of investigative material could have devastating consequences for the reputations and rights of individuals whose actions and statements are described. And you can understand how that would be true in the case of a secret investigation into a private citizen. You don't want the affidavit with all these allegations that may be unverified, maybe from sources that are wrong or misremembering things, to be floating around the public domain. To your point, in the absence of that in this case, what you have is unnamed sources leaking all sorts of stuff that are doing the same sort of damage to the president's reputation here. And you also have to add the point that President Trump is the one who is asking for this to be released also. So he doesn't seem too concerned about the reputational hit he might take if it comes out. On the point about the witnesses, that's the other thing that the government really leans on, is that release of the affidavit might chill the witnesses that are currently working with the department or even future witnesses. I mean, we've already had some leak, some reporting that there might have been somebody within President Trump's organization who was helping the Justice Department, pointing them to this information, where it was stored, what President Trump had. And if you don't think that President Trump has already gone down his personnel list trying to figure out who that witness is, I think you don't remember the President Trump that I do. So I tend to agree with Kim, though, that what would maybe weighing more on the judge's mind is just the precedent of this and not wanting to break from the precedent, that you don't release this pre-investigative or this investigative stuff before any indictment is made or before the case is closed.
Do you think that Reinhart will release it or not, Kyle?
I tend to think not at this stage. I mean, we don't know how long this investigation is. The Justice Department, the FBI are intending to take it on, but we're still a couple years out from the 2024 election. And so he could be thinking that it will certainly be in the next, several months that they will either make an indictment or they will close the case. And then these media organizations and other people who are interested in public disclosure can come back and say, aha, now there is no pending investigation. So the argument the Justice Department made about witnesses and so forth doesn't hold anymore. So give us the affidavit.
Well, but then by that time, you have a circumstance where, let's say they don't indict, but, let's stick these accusations that are in the affidavit out there anyway, because, they'll have the ability to perhaps to harm Donald Trump's reputation or others. I mean, there's no argument for releasing the affidavit at that time. It seems it's stronger than the one there is now.
Yeah, I guess I would disagree with that, because I think the disclosure interest would be the same in helping the public get to the bottom of this. What changes is the arguments on the other side of the ledger, the arguments that the Justice Department is making against disclosure, I think much weaker if they don't have a pending investigation. And as we've already discussed, President Trump is calling for this to be out, so their argument about not harming people's reputations, I don't think that's very persuasive either.
All right, Kim, stepping back here in the 10 days since the search, we learned about the search. What is the totality of the information we know? What do we really know here about what the FBI is going after and what kind of case they're putting together against Trump, if indeed they are? You have intimations in the warrant about the Espionage Act, about potential obstruction of justice statutes, and so on. Yet I don't see any evidence in the warrant so far, at least based on what we've seen publicly so far, of course, and we don't know what the Justice Department really has, that rises to the level of an indictment and all of the commensurate, even on its own terms, never mind all of the political forces that such an indictment would unleash.
Yeah, that's just it. We don't know a lot, but what we do know, even though there's been some very inflammatory words and statutes mentioned there, the Espionage Act, really? That just really jumped out at me. We have that law that has been on the books for ages. It's rarely been used. And in fact, when I saw that, I actually led me to think that maybe they were grasping a little bit here when you have to resort to the Espionage Act as one of your motivations for engaging in this. I mean, some people could say, well, that suggests that there really is something truly super serious here. But as you note, there was nothing else in that warrant to suggest that. There's a lot of other big unknowns as well, too. To me, one big question, which even the affidavit wouldn't necessarily settle, and even if we could see all of it, because that would describe the nature of the investigation, potentially what they were looking for, who was potentially talking to them. But the other big piece that wouldn't come in that, possibly, is why the raid and why now? What happened in the intervening time between that last meeting that the Trump team has described in June, which it claims went cordially, and then suddenly this raid? Why at all times, 18 months after the president has left office and in the run-up to an election, is this happening now? But, to your bigger point, Paul, we don't know a great deal other than that there apparently are some documents. Apparently, some of them had classification markings on them, and that the Department of Justice wanted them back. And that's kind of what we know. And even there, that's muddy, as Donald Trump is on the record as saying that if they did take any classified documents from his house, that he had already declassified them anyway.
Right, which suggests that there'd be a huge fight in court over whether he has that classification authority to do that, as he claims.